Welcome back to my channel. This week I am making Valerie's costume from Pokémon X and Y to compete in the Overload New Zealand Cosplay Competition in Auckland. So without any further ado, let me show you how I made it. For the pattern base I'm using Simplicity S8 and 971. For the main outer layer of fabric, I'm using this leftover yellow cotton from my Snow White dress, and underneath that I'll be layering this pink iridescent organza just to give it a little sparkle through the holes, and behind that, this plain yellow drill. Finally, the lining fabric, I have some old Pokémon cotton. Now, let's get on to construction. So first I did a mock-up using Calico of the Simplicity pattern exactly as it was, and here I've drawn in the places that I'm going to be changing. So I will be shortening the bottom along this line here, and then adding the seam here, which will get covered by a ribbon eventually. So now I need to cut out these shapes. After cutting out the shapes, I then use these pieces as the new pattern pieces, and then once again cut the pattern from Calico to create another mock-up. And after sewing the pieces together, here is the new mock-up with the new seam lines that I wanted, and I can't show you here, but it did fit perfectly. So I'm now transferring those new pattern pieces to the lining fabric. And then the cotton fabric, followed by the drill, and finally the organza. With all the layers cut out, I then proceed to baste some of them together. So the lining layer gets one layer of the drill, and the cotton layer gets a layer of pink organza and a layer of drill as well. And using a long straight stitch on my machine, I baste them together along the outside edge here. After all the pieces have been basted, it is now time for assembly, so let's sew these edges together. Once I'd sewn all the lining pieces together, I pressed all the seams flat, and now it's time to add in boning channels, and for that I'm just using a length of cotton twill tape and sewing very closely to the edges. And before sewing the outer piece to the lining, I have to add those purple ribbons that Valerie has, so I'm just sewing those along the top of the seams here. Now back to boning. So for the front and the very edge ones, I'm using flat steel boning. And for the rest of the channels, I'm using spiral steel boning. With all of the bones inserted, I can now attach the front and back pieces together along the sides. I also understitch the seam just to make sure the lining fabric stays where it's meant to. Next, I trim back the excess fabric in the seam so that when I go to put the eyelets in the back, it won't get in the way. Next, I fold the corset so that the right sides are out, and I baste along one of the edges just to keep the boning in place while I'm working with it. And then I create the final boning channel down the back edge of the corset here. Now, using the guides provided by the pattern piece, it's eyeletting time. First I use my hole punch to punch out the holes for the eyelets, and then, using my other tool, I set the eyelets in place. Ta-da! And I just repeat this method until all the eyelets have been placed. And now it's time to cover the raw edges with some bias tape.
Okay, so I just got back from the fabric store because I decided that the original bias tape that I'd brought for this project was 1, too thin, and 2, too lemony, and I needed something a bit more buttery yellow, so I've since remedied that. And while I was there, I came across this roll of lilac trim, which I thought would just look beautiful where I had sewn the purple satin ribbons on the corset. So what I'm going to do is add this to either side of the purple. Bummer thing about that is because I've already sewn up the corset, put the bones in it and everything, it means I'm going to have to hand stitch them on, so I'm going to do that now. And then I can finally put the bias tape along the top and bottom edge of this corset. And that'll be it, a donezo. So let's get started.
After hand sewing all the decorative ribbon down, I can now add bias along the top and bottom edges of the corset. First, I machine stitched it to the front edge of the corset here. And then I folded it over encasing the raw edge and hand stitched it to the lining. Which took absolutely forever, mind you. And with that done, the corset was mostly finished, but I hear you saying, hold on a minute, doesn't hers have butterflies on the front and back? And yes, it does. So let me introduce you to overcomplicating a simple thing. I decided butterflies just weren't that great because it's Pokemon World, so I took Vivians, which are the butterflies from Kalos, and I made an embroidery file out of them and decided to embroider that on 4 layers of crystal organza. I did 4 little Vivians total for the corset and then 1 extra shiny one for the hair bow, which I'll show you later. As you can see here, the embroidery is finished, but the wings are looking a little bit lacking. So I decided to fill in all of the gaps using a combination of glitter glue and straight up glitter. I was really happy with how this turned out, and then I sealed it all so that the glitter wouldn't come off using Mod Podge. After they dried, it was then time to cut them out, and I did this using a cool little trick using a hot knife or a soldering iron. So this actually finishes the edges of the fabric so that it doesn't fray. And at this point they're almost finished, they just need a little bit more detail. So using some black beads, I finished the edges here. I used black beads for the wings and white beads for the eyes and sewed them using this clear thread. And to hide all the thread on the back of the butterflies, I glued them to this taffeta, which I originally used for the skirt, but you'll learn more about that later. And then I used the soldering iron and once again cut them out, sealing in those edges. And voila, this is how they turned out. I'm super stoked with them. I think they're the best part of the costume, just between me and you, but now I need to attach them to the corset. So to do that, I just put snaps on them so that they're easily removable, and I can wash the corset in future if I need to.
The corset! All I need to do is put the X on the front and this is done. So I think that's what I'm going to work on right now because it's easy and I'm feeling lazy. So let's get into it. Hello, I'm back and I'm really cold. Anyway, I have done the little crisscross that goes on the front of the corset. I used jump rings and I threaded through the ribbon and it worked really well. So originally I wanted to just thread the jump rings through, you know, split them open, thread them through the fabric and have them go on that way. But the jump rings I got don't have a split in them. They're a fully enclosed circle, so that's why I've had to sew them on, but I think they look really cool this way. And let me show you how I did it.
I placed the jump ring on the corset where I've marked, and then using some matching thread, I then sew it directly to the corset, making sure to leave open a little gap so that I can eventually thread the ribbon through it. Speaking of, here is that ribbon, so what I do here is thread it through the little gap in the jump ring, finish the end with some fire, and then glue it so that it stays in place. And with that done, the corset is done. For Valerie's shoes, I found these black heels at the second-hand shop and I intend to beautify them. First, using one of my fabric pens, I draw on the design that she has on hers. And then using some of my fancy pink acrylic paint, I begin to paint the design in. It was at this point I realised it's not showing up well just being straight pink, so I did a base of white acrylic first and then covered it in the pink. To create the weird sculptural bits that he has on the toes of the shoes, I'm using Crayola Model Magic. So this is really cool. It works just like Play-Doh and then it dries and it's really light. So I just sculpted it to the shape I wanted directly onto the shoe and then let it cure for a couple of days. Once it was completely dry, I painted it using the same acrylic that I did on the rest of the shoe, and then I glued them in place. For the fabrics, I'm using a combination of glitter tulle and a stiff black tulle. And then for finishing the edges, I'm using this black ruffled lace and this plain black ribbon. Now as for a pattern for this, I didn't use a pattern. Instead, I just used maths and created a series of rectangles, and here is my working. First, I cut out the lining layer, which I just used a black cotton for. And the first part I assembled was the waistband. So I sewed it along this line here. And then I sewed together the lining layer along this edge here. Then I sewed the scalloped ruffled trim along the bottom edge just to create a nice little fun detail. As you can see here, first I sewed it upward and then I flipped it back down and then sewed it again. And then I moved on to the waistband. So here you can see me ironing down the seam allowance on both edges of it, and then I folded it in half and ironed it once again. Then that gets attached to the top edge of the skirt that we've created. I left a small little opening in the back of this skirt so that I could insert elastic for the waistband. And if you're a clever sewist, unlike I am here, I'm sure you can figure out why at this point it is a bad idea to add the waistband elastic. Next, I begin to cut out all of the chill strips and coat my entire house in glitter in the process. Once all of the strips had been cut out, I then sewed them together directly using my overlocking machine. So the glitter ones got attached to the glitter ones and the stiff tulle got attached to the stiff tulle. And at this point I also added that black ribbon to the bottom edge of all the strips just so that it wouldn't be scratchy and touch my skin in the future. I also gathered the top edge of all of the strips, and here's how all three of those layers are looking.
Hello, so it's a new morning now and I have spent the morning cutting out all the tiers for the petticoat, sewing them together, adding the ribbon along the bottom and then gathering the top edge. And now comes the time when I'm meant to attach it to the petticoat, but silly me elasticated this thing yesterday, right? You all saw me do it, and to attach the tiers to the lining layer I need it to lay flat, so I'm going to cut out the elastic that I put in yesterday, attach the layers, and then re-thread the elastic back through. So let's get on to it.
Using a tailor's chalk, I mark out where I need all of the layers of the tulle to sit. Then I begin the painstaking journey of pinning the tulle to the lining layer and then trying to sew it down in place. And I repeat these steps until all three layers of the tulle have been attached to the lining layer. For the skirt, I created my own circle skirt pattern and made a mock-up out of a bedsheet before I decided, yeah, that looks good. Let's work out those scallops. So first I tried drawing them on, and then I did the maths to work out how to make every single scallop even. And then using that pattern piece I created, I cut the pattern out of some black fabric, which would be the bottom tier of the skirt, followed by some pink, which would be the middle tier, and then finally purple, which would be the top tier. Now, although you see me cutting out those two middle and top tier fabrics, I do end up swapping them out later, which you will hear more about. Anyway, to stabilize these flimsier fabrics, I ironed on some interfacing along the scallop edge just to keep those scallops looking nice and crisp. Now all the tiers are sewn together in the exact same way, and that is by sewing the front and back pieces together along one of the side seams, doing the same thing again with a lining fabric, and then sewing the lining and the outer fabrics together along the scalloped edge.
Alright, now that all the skirt layers are hemmed, I have a zip here, which I'm going to attempt to put into the side here. So I'm just going to baste these layers together and hope for the best, really. I don't really know what I'm doing here.
So unfortunately I lost the rest of the footage here, but here is the fixed skirt with a waistband added.
Okay, so at this point I have drafted and made my very first mock-up of the top. As you can see here, the sleeve is very long. I did this by first drawing out the shapes onto craft paper and then transferring those to the fabric, which is what you see here. I'm very happy with how the sleeve turned out. That was a one and done thing, which has just made this so much easier. To be honest, this whole thing has been a one and done because this mock-up is perfect. So now comes the really nerve-wracking part for me, and I am going to cut into the real fabrics, so wish me luck.
And just like I've mentioned with the skirt before it, you'll see me cutting into these fabrics here, which aren't the final fabrics, and I'll get to that in a bit, I promise. To make a full wing piece, I sew the pink fabric on top of the yellow fabric here.
Hello, and welcome to the start of a new day for me. This is not a great day because at the end of making this much progress on the costume yesterday, I have decided the fabrics I initially brought for this do not work together. May have had a little breakdown about it last night, because I mean I've gotten so far into the construction of this only to decide I hate how it looks. I did consider dyeing the pink because I think the pink is the worst offender, because all the other fabrics I've chosen for this were such high contrast fabrics and that's a low contrast. I didn't think it really fit. And then I was like, no, it's no good because it's also too textured compared to everything else. So I've just gotten back from the fabric store. I have a whole bunch of new fabrics and now it's time to remake just about everything you see here apart from the corset and the black part of the skirt. So I'll probably be busy for the next few hours, but when you see me, hopefully everything will be back to this stage, but in the new, more cohesive fabrics.
So yeah, that's the story of the fabric. Anyway, back to those wings. After sewing the pink on top of the yellow, I then just do a really close satin stitch along the edges here, just to hide the raw edge of the pink. Next, to do the black details along the bottom edge of the wing, I use the sand wash satin, which I've actually backed in an iron-on interfacing because it was too flimsy otherwise, and I just apply that the same way that I did the pink fabric. First by top stitching it to the yellow and then finishing the edge with that tight satin stitching. Then it's on to creating the swirl details that she has on the wings. So using some tracing paper, I use the pattern I created and trace the swirl directly onto the yellow fabric. And using that to guide me, I then just once again tight zigzag, creating a satin stitch, and follow those lines to create the swirls. With all of the swirls and applique work done, I can now finally close up the seams of the sleeve. So I sew it along the top and bottom edge here, leaving a little gap open at the end so I can have some armholes, but more on that a little bit later. Next I started working on the shoulder point things. I don't know what they're called, but the pointy shoulder bits. So first I cut them out of the pink fabric, then I cut them out of a layer of buckram, which I fused to the lining layer piece of the shoulder points, just so that the points would stay nice and stiff. Then I sewed the satin layer to the lining layer around the outside edge here. I then trimmed the excess fabric from the seam and turned it right way out, and here's how it was looking. Next I cut out the underlayer part of the blouse, and I used the simplicity pattern here. I cut out a layer of satin and a layer of the cotton. Now to stabilise the satin, because it was a very flimsy fabric, I sprayed it with some hairspray first, which made it nice and stiff and a heck of a lot easier to work with. I then basted a layer of the cotton to the back of the satin just for that extra stability. With all the pieces basted together, I then moved on to sewing the darts. Then I sewed the front to the back pieces at the shoulder and side seams. Then I cut out the scalloped neckband out of a sandwash satin. I sewed together the under collar part first, which as you can see here isn't scalloped. And then I sewed that part to the scalloped neckband along the inside edge. I turned it right way out, and then I had to figure out how to attach it to the bodice. So after basting the 3 layers together, I pinned the scallop edge to just the shoulder part with the buckram in it, and then I stitched it down using my machine. And before the bottom edge of the scallop gets sewn down to the rest of the blouse, I first had to put these little swirl bits in at the shoulders, and I did that exactly as I did the ones on the wings. Good morning and welcome to a brand new day of, I don't know what day I'm up to at this point working on this. I've been doing so many other things at the same time that it's all just sort of melted into one. Anyway, let me update you on where I am and what I have left to do. Cool. Top. Pretty much done at this stage. I've done all the top stitching detail on the scallops here, and I have done the top stitching on the little curves. All that's left to do on the top is obviously attach the sleeves, hello, and then finish the bottom edge of the shirt, and I'm just going to do that using some black bias tape because you do not see it. Once that's done, I'm going to do some sort of close fastening in the front here. I'm thinking a hook and bar and a snap, and that's that done. Sleeves, practically finished apart from the internal components. I have brought bamboo to shove into the ends so that I can keep the sleeves nice and erect. However, my bamboo is straight up and down, and the end of the sleeve curves slightly, so I have to figure out how to get a bit of a curve in these before I put them into the sleeves themselves. I'll also be sewing some loops just to keep the bamboo in place so it doesn't fall around while it's in there. Speaking of the sleeves, from what I've been able to figure out, it doesn't look like she ever has her hands out of them, but I'm a human and not an anime character, don't know if you'd noticed, and sometimes I like to use my hands to do things, so I have
made a secret compartment where my hands can come out of the sleeves in case I need to do things with my hands. So this is just a video to show you the mechanics of the sleeve hole for my hands. So you open it up like this. On one side you've got the washers, and then on this side you've got the corresponding magnets, and there we go. Done. So I did think about using snaps, but then I have to try and it gets fiddly, you know. Magnets easy, boom, done. Hello, and welcome to the part of the video where I have been trying to figure out how to make the headpiece bit that sticks out about this far and keeping it stiff enough so that it's stable and it doesn't fold in on itself, which has proved to be very difficult. So originally I thought I'd cut the pieces out of 2 pieces of buckram and then fuse that to the fabric. This is what they make like hats and stuff out of, but as you can see, way too floppy and I need it to stick out here. Didn't work. So then I thought I'll cut it out of a thick craft foam. That should work, right? But once again we run into the issue of it's almost there, but see how much movement's in that? It's a bit too floppy still. So then I came up with this genius idea. We fused the buckram to the craft foam, and look, I mean, it's obviously going to move backward and forward, but it's not folding in on itself. So I'm going to fuse the buckram to this piece, and then we'll have both the pieces, and then I just cut it again out of the fabric. So I'll see you again when I'm back to the fabric stage.
Just like the satin fabric before, I'm also giving this one a spray of hairspray first, just to stiffen it up and making it easier to work with. First I cut out the shiny fabric, and then I use a plain cotton fabric to back it with. I'm doing this because the purple fabric on its own was actually quite sheer and I didn't want any of the black of the foam coming through. After I'd basted the purple pieces together, I then added the black tips out of the same sandwash satin that I did on the wings. First I top stitched the black piece into place, and then using the same satin stitching that I have been using on the rest of this project, I finished the edge of it and then added that swirl. Then I sewed 2 of the pieces together to about this point just here, and that's so I can leave a hole wide enough to fit the foam piece in.
So I glued the 2 pieces together and left it overnight, and they're stuck quite well, but for some extra stability I'm also going to iron on just an extra layer of buckram just to really make sure that it's not going to fall apart, and then I'll just hand sew those 2 sides together and that's the base structure done.
After sewing the 2 sides together, all I had to do was add the comb.
Alright, so for the choker I have this bit of lace which I have coloured purple. Originally I was going to do it out of the same ribbon that I've done for the corset and everything else, but it felt a bit lacking, so I wanted to spice it up a bit, and I've got this lace. Then I brought this butterfly necklace yesterday, and I'm going to take some of the charms off of it and put it onto the necklace, so that's what I'm going to do now.
With the choker done, the whole costume's done. Are you ready to see it on?
And there you have it. That is how I made Valerie's costume from Pokemon X and Y for the Overload Cosplay Competition. Speaking of...
Giving on over to the best construction and the best skit, the best of everything is... Killian! Who's that winner? Beautifully made, amazing detail to everything, just so much attention done, and again those beautiful little magnets coming out. Such an entertaining skit. Overall winner. Thank you so much.
I actually won Best in Show for that, which was incredibly shocking to me. I was not expecting it whatsoever. I just wanted to go and do a good skit, which I think I did, which if you want to watch, I'll link it up here and down below. I had a lot of fun performing that, and it was really nice to get to perform in the big poofy skirt, not so much with the lack of hands. I am happy with how this costume turned out. I would have liked to have had more time to add more details like the Vivian butterflies that I added to it, but I was so short on time making this. It's honestly a miracle that it got finished at all in time for the competition. One thing I am super happy with though is the silhouette of it was just perfect. Like, it looked exactly as the cartoon did, and that made me so happy because that was the most important part of making this costume for me. As usual, let me know your thoughts about it down below in the comments section, and if you liked it, maybe leave a like, and if you really liked it, maybe even consider subscribing. I do a lot of sewing, crafting and fun related things here on this channel, and I'm trying to upload a lot more frequently. With all that being said, I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye! Me. Well done, well done.